probably already be familiar with our main speaker. Sophie is one of the leading voices on tourism in Uzbekistan, and she's spoken for us many times before. She holds the very prestigious title of Uzbekistan's Tourism Ambassador to the UK. She's a well-known guidebook author, having written the Brad guidebooks to Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. She also works as a consultant at the World Bank. She's chairman of the Royal Society for Asian Affairs. And as you will discover today, she's a real, genuine Silk Road expert. So it was about a year and a half ago, I think, when I think Sophie and I met up in London. I think it was in the cafe, and we discussed about setting up a really unique tour. We wanted to offer our clients a really different tour that not only showcased many of Uzbekistan's, Silk Road sites, which is obviously what the country is famous for, but also venture off the beaten track into other pockets of the country where there are very few tourists, but nonetheless sites that are really, really worth visiting and that very few people know about. And this is how we developed our trip, the Silk Road Secrets of Uzbekistan. So Sophie's going to go through that trip by way of some amazing photographs showcasing these places. And then at the end of the talk, I'd like to share some photographs of a recent group trip that we did. And then we'll talk about some of the practicalities of traveling to Uzbekistan, and then we'll finish with the Q&A. So I'm going to hand over to Sophie now, who is going to take over and take you on a journey through Uzbekistan. Over to you, Sophie.
Thank you very much, Raoul, for the warm introduction and for inviting me to speak to you tonight. Raoul mentioned that this trip has been about 18 months or so in the development. And when Raoul first mooted the idea of my leading a tour to Uzbekistan, it was a dream come true, because although I travel to the country usually 4 or 5 times a year and have been doing so since 2010, I don't normally do so as a tour guide or as a tour leader. Raoul also gave me complete freedom to design and execute what I think is the ultimate Uzbekistan tour. Normally, when you see group tours advertised to Uzbekistan, you're following somebody else's itinerary, and one that many people have followed before. It's not new, it's not exciting, and too often you're nose to tail with other groups finishing or visiting almost exactly the same sites. So tonight I'm going to be talking to you about the Silk Road Secrets of Uzbekistan, which is the itinerary Raoul and I have developed together and which we trialled for the very first time in March this year. The dozen wonderful guests that I had with me were very willing guinea pigs, and we tested everything from the hotels, the restaurants, the transports, the sites and the shopping, and we tested them together. And there were some things which worked brilliantly and other things that I wanted to change and to improve for the future. So I'm very glad then that Raoul has agreed to let me lead the Silk Road Secrets of Uzbekistan 2.0 in March 2025. It will be the only tour that I lead to Uzbekistan next year, and I'm sure that it's going to be even better than before. Can I have the next slide, please, Raoul? So this is just an introductory slide to show you the location of Uzbekistan in the world. And we can move straight on to the next slide, please. So I'm going to start my talk, though, with some historical and geographical scene setting. The Silk Road is a phrase that we hear very often, but it's a misnomer. There was not just one Silk Road, but rather an extensive network of interconnected intercontinental trading routes. And silk was far from the only or even the most important of the goods which were being traded. In fact, although the history of these Silk Roads is millennia long, it's only since the 19th century that this name has been used to describe it. The man who popularized it was a German geographer, Ferdinand von Richthofen, and he used the phrase Seidenstrasse, the German for Silk Road, in the title of his book, Über die Zentralasiatische Seidenstrasse Binsum, in 1877. Where did the Silk Roads go? Well, you have to think of it like a spider's web stretching between Europe and Asia, just as it is on the map here. In the west, cities such as Venice and Istanbul could reasonably claim to be the western termini, although the goods traded along the Silk Roads certainly didn't stop there. As we look east along the map, there are cities such as Aleppo, Damascus, and Baghdad, all of which had key roles to play as regional centres of trade, of culture, and of political power. My own fascination, though, is with the Silk Road cities in what are now the 5 Central Asian republics, in particular the historic sites of Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. But you can find Silk Road cities much further east too, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in India, north into Russia, and then, of course, into China, where you can still visit the likes of Shan, Kashgar, and Danhuang. Next picture, please. The Silk Road Secrets of Uzbekistan itinerary focuses on the very heart of the Silk Road, this central part. Since 1991, these lands have fallen within what is now the Republic of Uzbekistan. But in its 1,000 years of human history, they have been an integral part of numerous empires, including those of Cyrus the Great, Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, Amir Timur, more about whom later, and for much of the 20th century, the Soviet Union. Together, these changing borders, combined with the ribbons of long-distance trading routes winding their way within them, account for the incredibly rich, complex cultural heritage, which is clearly evident when you visit Uzbekistan today. Next slide, please. We know from the paleontological and archaeological finds that this area has been inhabited for at least 70,000 years. The most archaic remains, which are the Neanderthal skeleton of a child who died at around 10 years old, were discovered in the Teshik Tash cave in Surkhandarya, a mountainous region of southern Uzbekistan, which we'll visit during the tour. The placement of ibex horns in the same pit grave suggests that the child may have been ritually buried, although we don't know for sure. Ibex were certainly common here in prehistoric times, and the landscape would have been much more fertile and rich in wildlife than it is today. There were good hunting grounds, including in areas which are now deserts. We know this not only because of the fossil and bone discoveries, but also because of the huge number of petroglyphs. There are more than 150 of these rock art sites across Uzbekistan, concentrated in the Fergana Valley in the east, in the Tashkent oasis around the capital, and in Navoy region. The oldest of these petroglyphs date from the Mesolithic era, and they depict a wide range of species, including elephants, remarkably, which have long since died out in the wild. Part of their decline is due to climate change, but the number of archers also shown in the artworks makes it likely that other tastier species were hunted to extinction. Next slide, please. So the earliest inhabitants of what is now Uzbekistan would have been hunter-gatherers, moving wherever they thought there would be food. Nomads raising and herding livestock came later, and settled populations later still. The earliest built settlement we will see on the tour is Kampirtepe, which is near to Temiz in Surkhandarya. The archaeologist Edward Tretladze and his colleagues recently identified this site as Alexandria on the Oxus, one of the lost cities of Alexander the Great. The reason that the identification of this site took so long is that the name recorded by Ptolemy implies that the city was on the Oxus River, now known as the Amudarya, but the site that they were excavating was quite some distance from the riverbank. When they discovered the city's port, however, they realized that the river had changed its course in the 2,300 plus years since Kampirtepe was built, and the lack of a reliable water supply nearby is probably why the site was abandoned. The Amudarya River is the lifeblood of Central Asia, irrigating crops and providing drinking water in places where there is hardly any rainfall. Today, long links of the river form the international border, first between Tajikistan and Afghanistan, and then between Uzbekistan and Afghanistan. For this reason, the river is no longer navigable, but in antiquity, it was a critical transport artery for goods and for people, a wet section of the Silk Roads. Old Temiz, still on the river, has a substantial port, bazaars and caravanserais, and was a wealthy regional centre. Next photo, please. One of the most fascinating things to have travelled to Temiz along the river is Buddhism. The Amudarya was a conduit for ideas as well as for physical cargo. It's estimated that Buddhism arrived here from India during the Kushan Empire some 2,000 years ago. In Temiz, we'll be visiting two Buddhist monasteries, Fayez Tepe and Kara Tepe. Nearby are the ruins of the 12-meter-high Zermala Stupa, one of the oldest structures still standing in Central Asia. It's very rare for tour groups to go to Secundaria and to Temiz in particular, but as far as I'm concerned, this part of Uzbekistan is a must-see. Not only does it have some of the most important archaeological sites in the country, but visiting also gives you a strong sense of the far-reaching geographical and cultural ties which existed here millennia ago. Next slide, please. When we drive north from Temiz, you'll see how these multicultural influences persist to the present day. The cultural space of Baysun has intangible cultural heritage status, meaning that this particular district is recognized by UNESCO as preserving particular cultural practices and expressions, which are essential components of humanity's cultural diversity and creative expression. In ancient times, the Silk Roads linking Asia Minor and India made this an ethnic and cultural melting pot. But subsequent political changes isolated the people of Baysun, enabling them to keep those ancient traditions, which elsewhere had been lost. Their rituals show traces of several religions, including shamanistic beliefs, Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, and Islam, which came to the region later. Many of the rites that you see here, including to celebrate the spring festival of Nowruz, and for births, circumcisions, weddings, and funerals, are unique in the modern world. The people of Baysun are the guardians of something very special indeed. We will have a night here to meet and to talk with local people, to see their handicrafts in the Baysun Museum of National Applied Art, to taste their food, to listen to their music, and also to appreciate the beauty of the surrounding landscape. Next slide, please. Staying with local families in homestays, in guest houses, and even in yurts gives you a very different perspective on Uzbekistan than if you're limited to hotels. I personally am a huge advocate of community-based tourism, as I know is Rahul, because it provides us with an immersive cultural experience. And as importantly, it also ensures that local people benefit economically and socially from the interaction with tourists. Uzbekistan is rightly renowned for the warmth of its hospitality. And when we sit together, eat together, talk together, exchanging jokes and opinions and memories, we connect at a very deep level. Some of these exchanges become the basis of long-lasting relationships. I certainly have made friendships which are still going strong years after we first met. I hope that your time in Baysun will make a similar impression on you as it does on me, and that when you stay later at the guest house in Hayat village, you'll be able to start to compare and contrast the different experiences of rural life, because life in Baysun and Secundaria is very different to Hayat village in Navoy. After all, Uzbekistan is a country the same size as Spain, and there are many regional differences. Next slide, please. I'm going to move on now to talk about what are arguably the two greatest cities on the Silk Roads, and certainly the two which are easiest to visit, Samarkand and Bukhara. These twin cities, which are just 2 hours apart by high-speed train, embody the romance of the Silk Roads, and more often not, then they are the reasons that people want to visit Uzbekistan in the first place. Their magnificently tiled madrasas and mosques illustrate coffee table books, magazine covers, brochures, and their dramatic architecture has the power to silence even the most well-traveled of visitors. Of the two cities, Samarkand is the oldest and largest. It was founded in the 8th century BC, although the surrounding area was inhabited by humans since at least the late Paleolithic era. The name Samarkand means city of stone in Sogdian, and the ancient Greeks adopted the same name. They called it Marakanda. The city was a major target on Alexander the Great's march east, and Alexander conquered Samarkand in 329 BC. When he finally took control of the city, he declared, "Everything I have heard about Marakanda is true, except that it is more beautiful than I ever imagined." Next slide, please. The city of Samarkand you see today is not the same city that Alexander saw, though. It's not unusual for a city to go through phases of development, of destruction and reconstruction, and Samarkand is no different. The Greeks, Sasanians, Hephthalites, Samanids, Karakinids, and others all left their mark. Two mighty emperors would change the appearance of Samarkand beyond recognition, though, and in a very short period of time. Genghis Khan, the infamous Genghis Khan, attacked Samarkand in 1220, allegedly killing all those who took refuge in the citadel and in the mosque. His Mongol troops pillaged the city and they laid it to waste. The ruins they left behind are what we now know as the Afrasiab archaeological site. One of the most exciting things happening in London this year is the Silk Roads exhibition, which is starting at the British Museum in September, and it includes fantastic murals which were excavated at Afrasiab. It's the first time they've been allowed to leave Uzbekistan, so we're incredibly lucky that they're coming to the UK on loan. Samarkand was far too valuable a site to leave as a wasteland, however, and by the time that Marco Polo visited towards the end of the century, the city was already well on its way to recovery. Marco Polo described it in his travels as a very large and splendid city, a view which was echoed by another famous traveller, Ibn Battuta, 40 or so years later. Next slide. It was in the 14th century, in this period of recovery, that the Samarkand we see today started taking shape. Quite rightly, historians write of the Timonid Renaissance. Amir Timur, who was known in the West as Tamerlane, made Samarkand his capital in 1370, and over the next 4 decades, he built a spectacular city. The Timurid Empire stretched from Turkey to India, and Timur wanted Samarkand to be its jewel. He brought the greatest architects, engineers, and artisans here to make his dream a reality, and he paid for it all with the spoils of his many wars. The Bibi Khanum Mosque, which was completed in 1404 and intended to be Samarkand's congregational mosque, is a case in point. Construction of the mosque was paid for with the wealth Timur seized sacking Delhi. He used 95 Indian elephants, another recent acquisition, to do the heavy lifting, and artisans decorated the interior with gilded papier-mâché, a craft which he brought from Kashmir. In size, the Bibi Khanum dwarfed all other mosques of the time. It could accommodate almost 10,000 worshippers and remained the tallest building in Samarkand well into the 20th century. Next slide. A very short walk from the Bibi Khanum is the Registan, the architectural masterpiece which is to Uzbekistan as the Taj Mahal is to India or Angkor Wat is to Cambodia. In the Timurid period, this was the most important part of the city, politically and economically. But in the intervening years, it has grown even more in splendour. Timur's grandson, the emperor and astronomer Ulugh built the madrasa on the left, in doing so creating one of the greatest universities in the Islamic world. The madrasas in the centre and on the right, the Tilyakori and Sherdor madrasas, are later structures constructed in the 17th century by Samarkand's military governor. By the time they were built, the seat of power had shifted from Samarkand to Bukhara. Interestingly, the governor who built these two buildings, Yalangtush Bahadur, died before the Tilyakori madrasa was complete. And it wasn't until the Soviet period that the prayer hall's outer dome was finally finished. Next slide. Samarkand was no longer the capital because when the Timurid Empire collapsed, multiple smaller successor states emerged in its place. These included 3 khanates, essentially kingdoms, covering what is now Uzbekistan and parts of neighbouring countries. In the west was the Khanate of Khiva. In the centre, the Khanate and later Emirate of Bukhara. And in the east, the Khanate of Kokand. We'll be visiting Bukhara on the Silk Road Secrets of Uzbekistan tour. And though Samarkand is the most famous of Uzbekistan's tourist destinations, Bukhara is my absolute favourite. Nowhere else combines historic monuments and vibrant residential neighbourhoods so well. And with around 140 cultural heritage properties in the old city alone, there is always something more to see. Next slide, please. There are certain things in Bukhara's UNESCO World Heritage Sites which are must-sees. The Ark Fortress, the Poi Kalon complex, and the Samanid Mausoleum amongst them. We'll see these with a local guide. But Bukhara is a city which has to be experienced as well as seen. I want you to go for a bath or a massage in the medieval bathhouses, to haggle in the trading domes for textiles and ceramics, and to sit drinking tea in the Abbey House, watching the world go by. This isn't a city to rush through. It deserves your time and quiet contemplation. Bukhara is often called Holy Bukhara or Noble Bukhara because of the number of madrasas and shrines which are here. But you don't have to be religious or even spiritual to enjoy the atmosphere. Next slide. The primary focus of my talk tonight has been on Uzbekistan's historic sites, but many of them are entwined with Uzbekistan's Soviet legacy, the 20th century history of the country. If it weren't for Soviet archaeologists, historians, and conservation teams, we wouldn't still have or understand many of the monuments that we enjoy today. But the opposite is also true. The Ark in Bukhara is a fraction of its former size because it was suffered in the Red Army bombing of the city in 1920, and many of the other monuments which were around it were completely destroyed. Uzbekistan, throughout its history, has always been shaped by its invaders, with these cycles of construction, of destruction, and rebirth. Next slide. Similarly, the capital, the city of Tashkent, was almost completely leveled by an earthquake in 1966. It was rebuilt as a planned Soviet city, with workers coming from all across the USSR to provide their labor. Like the Silk Road cities of old, Soviet migrants made their mark. You can walk down Taras Shevchenko Street and see the monument dedicated to this great Ukrainian poet. The Alisher Novoy Opera and Ballet Theatre was designed by Alexei Shushev, the Russian architect most famous for creating Lenin's mausoleum in Red Square, and it was built with Japanese prisoners of war. And in the antiques halls of the Yangiabad Bazaar, you'll find crystal from Czechia, porcelain from St. Petersburg, and carpets made in the Caucasus. Next slide, please. The same eclectic influences are visible, and perhaps I should say edible, in the food halls of markets and in restaurants. Morkovka, the Korean carrot salad, is a perennial favorite, as is the mayonnaise-drenched olivier, a Russian favorite. Riding the Tashkent metro pictured here, every station was designed and decorated by a different architect or artist, and it's one of the highlights of the trip. I particularly like the Cosmonaut station, which was inspired by the Russian space program, but there is also the Alisher Novoy station, named after the national poet, which feels like you're inside a mosque. I think we'll go on to the next slide. As you might have guessed, I can talk about Uzbekistan for hours, but I'm aware that Rahul has got more to say, and then we want to move on to do some Q&A as well. Please do put your questions in the chat box so that I can answer them, and I hope you'll be able to join us on the Silk Road Secrets of Uzbekistan tour in March.
Thank you, Sophie. Thanks for that absolutely insightful talk. And just as Sophie said, I'd like to talk a little bit about this trip, but also to share some photographs as well from our recent tour out there. So these are the dates for the tour next year. We will be running the trip on the 19th of March, which will finish on the 1st of April. The reason we've chosen that date is it coincides with the Festival of Nowruz, which is an incredible experience that we will do in Baysun. It's a guaranteed departure, and there'll be a maximum of 14 people on the trip, and we're running a special offer on the trip as well. There's a website link there for direct access to the tour on our website. And yeah, Sophie, feel free to add any comments on some of the photographs from the trip here. So yeah.
So this is in front of the Registan with the group that we took in March. You can see we're wrapped up warmly, but actually March is a pretty good time to go. We had some days with very bright sunshine. This wasn't one of them, obviously, when it was very, very warm. And other days, just a jumper or a jacket is fine. So don't worry about the cold. It's not going to be the depths of winter and the snow. This is in the Nuratau Mountains, and it's one of the areas where we stay in the local guest house. I wanted to include this for several reasons, one of which is that people assume that Uzbekistan is a desert. They have in their mind the dunes and the camels, and yes, there are sand deserts across large parts of the country, but there are also some fantastic mountain scenery, which we get to appreciate here. And we had a walk the evening when we arrived, and then this one the following morning, up from the guest house into the surrounding hills to see, in this case, a wild sheep breeding program, which is happening to boost the population of the local wild sheep. This very, very silly photograph on the left was when we were in Bukhara. There are many different kinds of national hat in Uzbekistan. This particular one is made from sheepskin, and we decided that we all looked like Boris Johnson, so we had to have a photograph taken. And the other picture here is at the Hayat, the guest house in Hayat village. As you can see, warm enough to be sat out for breakfast and enjoying the sunshine in the garden. The site on the left is Kampir Tepe, the site of Alexandria on the Oxus that I mentioned, and it's always been one of my favorite archaeological sites. I first went there about 15 years ago, and other than the fact that it's historically very, very significant, the other thing is that you get it entirely to yourself. If you're in the monuments in the more developed tourism centres like Samarkand and Bukhara, there will be other tourists there, but when you go down to Termiz, you're hardly likely to see another foreigner at all. And the day we were at Kampir Tepe, we had the entire archaeological site to ourselves. The picture on the right is from the Kizilkum, the red desert that covers a lot of central Uzbekistan, with one of our guests admiring the views from the dunes. This is another one of our lovely guests.
And that's one of my favorite photographs, actually. I think it's a great one.
One of the best things in Uzbekistan, which you will remember long after your trip, is the taste of the freshly baked bread. And it's cooked in a tandoor, a clay oven, which is what we are looking at here. It has a hole in the top, and so the baker has to stick their head in and their arms and almost dive into the oven to get the bread in and out. This is another picture from the Nuratau Kizilkum biosphere, so close to the guest house, and it's a local viewpoint that people have built. So you can wander up from the guest house along a track, and this viewing platform greets you at the top.
Great, thank you, Sophie. So for those of you who maybe can't join in March and want to travel a bit sooner, there are plenty of other options, of course, in Central Asia. So I just wanted to mention some of those. So we have another trip. It's called the Uzbekistan Odyssey trip, which takes in, again, the key Silk Road sites, also ventures off the beaten track. We don't get as far as Termez on that particular tour. That's a really nice trip. Essential Uzbekistan is for those who are maybe a bit shorter on time, and this really focuses purely on the key Silk Road cities. So Samarkand, Bukhara, Khiva, and obviously Tashkent, the city that you would arrive in. We get a lot of people who sometimes want to tag on one of the neighboring countries, and Uzbekistan is great for that because it sits right in the middle. So you can easily tag on extensions to Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, and Turkmenistan. If you have a lot of time, you can do all five. You can do them standalone as well. So there's lots of kind of combinations of trips that one can do as well. So again, that's what makes, I think, Uzbekistan a fantastic kind of entry point to that region. But we'll move quickly on to some of the questions. Actually, no, sorry, let's cover some of the practicalities. So Uzbekistan is 5 hours ahead of GMT. Best time to travel would be March to May. Obviously, June, July, August are very hot months, so we tend to avoid those. September to November is also very good. And although November is probably more the shoulder season, again, it's a nice time to go because some of the crowds will have probably disappeared a bit from some of the big cities. So yeah, that would be a great time to go. And then after that, it gets a bit too cold. From the UK, there are very good flight connections, the direct flights with Uzbekistan Airways from London Heathrow twice a week, as you can see, Tuesday and Friday. And there's been a flight added from Gatwick Airport now as well on the Sunday. And if you are flying from the US, there are direct options 3 times a week from New York. In terms of immigration and visas, fortunately, British passport holders can enter without a visa for up to 30 days. US passport holders can get an e-visa. It costs $20. And I think Sophie was just telling me earlier that if you're over 55, you can also enter visa-free. And that rule also might be relaxed for all US citizens at some point in the near future. In terms of currency, the official currency is the Uzbek som. There are ATMs in most of the major cities. And as with most places in the world, the USD, the US dollar is the preferred foreign currency. But yeah, now let's move on to some questions. So I can see that we have some questions here. Sophie, someone has asked about domestic transport within the country, flights, long-distance trains, safety, etc. What are your comments? What would your kind of answer be with regards to domestic transport?
So Uzbekistan is a fairly large country. It's in terms of land area, the same size as Spain or California. So you don't want to be driving all the time. On the Silk Road Secrets of Uzbekistan trip, we use a mixture of high-speed trains, which are excellent, and also some road transport for the shorter journeys or places where the high-speed train doesn't go. If you're planning on going to Khiva or to Nukus, both of which are in the western part of Uzbekistan, generally I recommend that you fly in one direction, take a domestic flight, and then come back by road or train, or a combination of the two. The reason is that they are planning to extend the high-speed train to both of those cities, but the electrification of the line hasn't finished yet. So for the time being, it's easier to fly one way and drive the other. But wherever possible, I recommend using the train system. The trains are Talgo, the Spanish bullet train company. I think they have some more on order from South Korea, but it's a very, very fast, clean, affordable way to travel within the country.
Great. And in terms of safety, I mean, how safe is Uzbekistan as a destination?
Uzbekistan, whenever they do a sort of survey of travel destinations, Uzbekistan always comes up as one of the safest destinations. Petty crime and harassment are almost unheard of. So in terms of traveling with a group or traveling solo or traveling as a woman, I always feel very, very comfortable traveling within Uzbekistan. People are very, very helpful towards foreigners or towards strangers. They always want to be very, very helpful. So the safety issue is not something that I concern about. There is sometimes a travel advisory on the Foreign Office website. This is specifically to travel to the Afghan border, as in advising against it, because they don't want British nationals crossing into Afghanistan. But the cities within Uzbekistan itself are all very, very safe places to go.
In terms of languages, what are the widely spoken languages within Uzbekistan? And also, would Turkish be close enough to Uzbek to be mutually intelligible?
So Uzbek is a Turkic language, and many Turkish speakers say that they can get the gist of what is being said in Uzbek. They're not exactly the same, but they're close enough that you would have a general comprehension. Russian is also still widely spoken because of the Soviet influence, and Russian is often considered to be a language of intercultural communication, because although the Uzbek ethno-linguistic group is the largest community within Uzbekistan, there are also large populations of Tajiks, of Kazakhs, of Karakalpaks, of Tatars, all of whom have their own languages. So often those groups will speak to each other in Russian. English is becoming increasingly common as well. particularly in the tourist areas, because there is a recognition that if they want to host foreigners, English is going to be the best language to do so. And most children and university students are now studying English and will want to practice with you.
In terms of this particular itinerary, like what, I mean, obviously you did this recently. What are the levels of walking and hiking on this trip? And would it be difficult for anyone with limited mobility?
So the only hiking component is the walks that we did from the Hayat village, and those are, pardon me, those are optional. There were some of the guests who decided that they would rather stay at the guest house and sit in the garden by the stream and relax. So that's those hikes are only a couple of hours out of the itinerary. There is also an optional hike of about 2 kilometers each way when we were in Baysun, because we went to see Kurganzola, another small fortress built by Alexander. But again, if you don't fancy that, you can stay at the hotel, you can stay with the bus, because those are short components. Other than that, certainly within the cities, the walking is on good paving, generally fairly flat. If you want to go into the archaeological sites, there's a certain amount of scrambling. You saw the pictures in my talk. But again, if you are limited in your mobility, there are plenty of viewpoints to stand where you could stand on the edge of the site to get a very good view. You don't have to be climbing down, climbing up and down the walls unless you want to.
And some of you asked about tour dates. I mean, I have tried twisting Sophie's arm into doing another departure next year, but at the moment it's just the one departure in 2025. There won't be a trip, not this exact tour this year. Of course, anyone wanting to do it on a private basis, we could run the same itinerary, but unfortunately, Sophie won't be there to lead that trip. So at the moment, the only trip which Sophie is leading is that 19th of March 2025 departure at this stage, unless she changes her mind and we have another departure in next year. And does the tour price include flights? It doesn't. What we've realized is that we have clients sometimes flying from various parts of the world, various parts of the country even. Yeah, and flight prices are quite dynamic, but we can assist with quotes for the international flights. Most people would tend to fly direct into Tashkent, but there are also options with Turkish Airlines, which would be indirect, and it would give some flexibility if you're planning to tag on one of the neighboring countries, for example. So we have some clients who occasionally cross into Tajikistan, and then they can fly out from Dushanbe via Istanbul, and likewise from some of the other neighboring countries. Then we have another question about tipping, Sophie. What are the tipping requirements typically, or what is the standard there in Uzbekistan?
So Uzbekistan isn't a country with a strong tradition of tipping. It's something that's relatively new, although it's always appreciated. What we did to make it easy on the Silk Road Secrets of Uzbekistan tour this year is that we had a group kitty. So everybody puts their tips into an envelope at the beginning of the tour, and then I distributed that specifically to the drivers that we had and to the guides who we had. You certainly don't need to tip in restaurants or to hotel staff.
And talking about restaurants, in terms of the food, obviously you showed a few photographs, I think, from the market there. I mean, how is Uzbekistan, say, for vegetarian or for other, for people with other dietary requirements?
So the food in the country is very, very varied. There are national favorites. So plov is the national dish. It's a dish very similar to biryani or palau. Lots of kebabs, samsa, which are like samosas, soups with noodles, and so on and so forth. In terms of vegetarians and vegans, a few years ago, it was very, very difficult because although there is a lot of fresh produce produced in Uzbekistan, the Uzbeks couldn't understand why you wouldn't want to have it with meat as well. They are, as tourism in the country is growing, vegetarianism is much better understood. And so as long as you let Raul know when you book the tour, we can inform all of the restaurants in advance and make sure that there is catering for all dietary requirements. And that goes for celiacs or people with other dietary requirements as well. They can be met. It's just we need to let people know in advance so they can prepare accordingly.
In terms of the local currency, is it possible to purchase that outside the Uzbekistan, or can you only get that within?
No, so the Uzbek Soom is not fully convertible. And so what that means is either you'll have to wait until you get to the country and pull out money from an ATM, which is what I do, or you can take US dollars with you and exchange them for local currency when you arrive.
And again, some people are asking, again, one of the key highlights of most of the trips that we run in Uzbekistan is that staying with local families or in these guest houses. And if they want to gift something to the families, is there anything that you would particularly recommend?
I usually try and take something which is quintessentially English. So English breakfast tea that comes in a nice caddy, nice biscuits, again in a tin, anything that you can get in a National Trust shop, those sorts of gifts. Again, picture books. I grew up in Salisbury, so anything that's got a picture of Salisbury Cathedral or Stonehenge on it is always very popular.
And in terms of because we stayed in the Hyatt village, in terms of the guest house, everyone stays in the same guest house. That's correct, right? We don't stay in separate guest houses.
Yes, that's correct. So Hyatt Guest House is the biggest guest house in that particular village. Actually, other members of the family have opened their own guest houses across the road, but they have opened, the family have got, the guest house has, I think, 3 buildings within the same garden. And one of them was finished at Easter this year and has got ensuite bathrooms. So it's more comfortable than before.
Great. And in terms of when packing, any particular type of bag that one would require, is a suitcase fine for this sort of trip?
A suitcase is absolutely fine. I think most of us had wheelie suitcases in March, although if you prefer to have a squashy bag or a rucksack, that's absolutely fine. Given the time of year, you'll want a variety of clothing. Make sure that you can layer, because some days will be very warm, but equally we had, I think, 2 days when it was a bit sort of rainy and grey, in which case you'll want an anorak and a jumper, and some good shoes for walking as well.
And I guess like the photos show, different terrains will be covering as well. So yeah, you get some, slight differences in altitude as well. So yeah, just like with a lot of destinations, just layer up probably. Alcohol, is that freely available in Uzbekistan, or what's the situation?
Yes, generally. Because of the Soviet influence, although it is on paper a Muslim country, many people do drink. Certainly beer is widely available, local wines, vodka if you're into vodka. You don't often get foreign imported alcohol because the duty on it is quite expensive, but quite frankly I'm happy drinking local beer and trying the local wines.
Really good. And in terms of the accommodation on this particular tour, obviously we've talked about the guest house. I mean, what would you have to say to anybody wanting to know about the standard of accommodation and different types of accommodation that we use? So
Rahul and I have deliberately picked nice places to stay. You're not going to stay anywhere and you think, oh, good, I'm not so keen on that. But it's a real mixture from modern sort of 4-star hotel in Tashkent, through to boutique hotel in Bukhara, which is a historic house which has been converted with beautifully hand-painted rooms, through to the guest houses. So a real mix, but always good quality, clean, good bathrooms, and friendly people running it.
Perfect. Well, I think that's it. Thank you, Sophie, for again enlightening us about Uzbekistan. Thank you all as well for attending and making time to hear the presentation. As I mentioned, we will be uploading a recording of this on the website. We are now going to be doing more regular webinars as well, talking about various destinations that we do. So from off the beaten track parts of India to Uganda to Colombia even. So there's a lot that's in the pipeline. So we'll keep you informed of those via our newsletter. As mentioned, if you are keen to join us next March in Uzbekistan, please drop me an email or give us a call. The number's on our website, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you've got. The trip is guaranteed, and if you're free between the 19th of March to the 1st of April 2025, I'd love to have you join us in Uzbekistan next year. All right, then, with that, have a good evening, and yeah, take care, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Thank you. Thanks, Sophie.